The sky was painted in shades of sorrow, gray clouds hung low, and a fine drizzle soaked the platform of the old train station. The iron rails glistened under the soft rain, and the cold air bit into the skin like tiny needles. People hurried past, clutching umbrellas and steaming cups of tea, eager to reach somewhere warmer. But for Sarah, there was no shelter from the storm, neither outside nor inside her heart. She gripped her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders and looked down at her 5-year-old son, Ayan, whose cheeks were flushed with fever. His small body leaned heavily against hers, limp and overheated. His breaths were short, shallow, and raspy. The boy hadn't eaten properly in 2 days, and now his temperature had climbed beyond anything Sarah could manage at home. The only hope was a children's hospital 2 cities away. She hurried toward the ticket counter, her worn-out sandals slipping slightly on the wet concrete. Her hands trembled as she reached into her small purse. A faded canvas pouch held together with safety pins. Inside were a few crumpled notes and coins she'd scraped together by selling her last pair of bangles and borrowing a little from her neighbor. 2 tickets to Lahore. 1 child, 1 adult, she said, her voice trembling. The ticket clerk barely looked at her. He typed quickly, then spoke in a flat tone. 1,800 rupees. Sarah's heart dropped. She unfolded every note, counted every rupee twice. Her total was 600 rupees. I'm sorry. I thought I had more, she stammered. Her eyes scanned the floor in humiliation. People behind her in line began sighing loudly and murmuring. One woman even muttered, "Why do people like this even bother coming to stations?" Sarah's throat tightened. She gently stepped aside, cradling Ayan in her arms. She crouched down beside him on the bench, trying not to cry as his head flopped weakly against her chest. She looked around, her eyes darting left and right, not for pity, but for a way out. She didn't want charity. She just wanted to save her son. The clock ticked closer to the train's departure. Each second felt like a step further away from hope. And then, from the corner of her eye, she saw him. A man in a dark coat. Watching. Not judging. Just, watching. Sarah wiped a tear from the corner of her eye, praying Ayan would stay awake just a little longer. His forehead burned against her chest. She kissed the top of his head and whispered, "Hold on, baby. We'll get there. I promise." But promises felt hollow when you had no money, no family, and no time. She looked up again, and her eyes landed on the man near the far column, a stranger dressed in a dark wool coat, his shoes slightly muddy from the rain. He had a trimmed beard peppered with gray, and a soft seriousness on his face. Unlike the others, he hadn't looked away when she stepped aside. He hadn't sighed, scoffed, or ignored her. He was still watching. For a moment, she hesitated. Her pride screamed at her not to move. But her son's burning skin screamed louder. She stood slowly and walked toward him, her steps cautious but firm. She kept her gaze low and her voice even lower. "Excuse me, sir," she said, barely above a whisper. "I don't mean to trouble you, but, my son is very ill. I only have 600 rupees. The train leaves in 10 minutes. Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry I can't pay the full fare." The man looked at her, really looked at her. Not just the dirt on her sandals or the worn edges of her scarf, but her tired eyes, her trembling lips, and the fierce love she held for the child in her arms. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask for details. Instead, he bent down and gently touched Ayan's forehead with the back of his hand. His brows furrowed at the heat radiating from the boy's skin. "This fever, it's serious," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Then, without saying another word, he turned and walked briskly to the ticket counter. Sarah watched, confused and stunned. 2 first-class tickets to Lahore, the man told the clerk. The clerk looked surprised. "You know her?" "No, he said simply. But I should. He returned moments later, handing Sarah the tickets without looking for thanks. She stared at the paper in her hand, then at the man's calm face. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. He gave a small smile. Sometimes, helping a stranger matters more than knowing them. And just like that, he turned and walked toward the platform, no questions, no expectations. Sarah held the tickets like they were made of gold. She looked down at her son, kissed his forehead again, and followed the stranger into the unknown. Little did she know, he wasn't a stranger at all. The train rattled softly as it pulled out of the station, rain streaking the windows like quiet tears. Inside the first-class compartment, the lighting was warm and the air lightly scented with tea and fresh linen. The cushioned seats felt like luxury to Sarah, something she hadn't experienced in years. She sat stiffly, almost afraid to relax, with Ayaan curled up on her lap. His fevered body trembled from time to time, but he was now wrapped in a large wool jacket, the stranger's jacket. It smelled of pine and leather, unfamiliar but comforting. Across from her sat the man who had changed her day, perhaps her life, with a single silent gesture. He held a small flask of tea in his hands, which he now gently offered to her. Here, he said. Let him sip a little. It might ease his throat. Sarah took it with both hands, almost reverently. Thank you, she said. Her voice trembled, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. The man didn't speak much. He just leaned back, occasionally glancing out the window, occasionally at Ayaan. Sarah studied him from behind lowered lashes. He was clearly not an ordinary man. He sat like someone used to observing rather than being observed, quiet but alert, composed in a way that didn't come from wealth, but from discipline. I'm Sarah, she finally said. I'm sorry if I seemed desperate back there. I just didn't know what else to do. He looked at her gently. You did exactly what any mother would. You asked for help when your child needed it. That's strength, not desperation. His words touched something deep inside her. No one had said anything like that to her in years, not since her husband had walked away after Ayaan's birth, leaving her with debt, heartbreak, and a child who needed more than she could ever give. I clean offices during the night, she said quietly. And I wash dishes at a dhaba during the day. I used to teach, once. Before everything collapsed. The man's expression didn't change, but there was something new in his eyes now. Recognition. Respect. And your son? He asked softly. Ayaan is everything, she whispered. He's the reason I get up every morning. I just couldn't lose him. The man nodded. You won't. They rode in silence for a while after that. But it wasn't an awkward silence, it was the kind of quiet that settles between two people who understand struggle, even if they've walked different paths. Sarah didn't know who he was, or why he had chosen to help her. But deep inside, she felt it, this was no ordinary encounter. This wasn't just a train ride. This was the beginning of something far bigger than she could imagine. The sun had already dipped behind the hospital building by the time the train reached Lahore, and the city was cloaked in a gentle twilight. Streetlights flickered on, casting halos over the streets as rickshaws, cars, and hurried pedestrians moved with evening urgency. Sarah stepped off the train holding Ayaan close to her chest. His fever hadn't broken, and he was barely conscious. Panic threatened to rise in her throat again, but a steady voice cut through the chaos. I've already called ahead, the man said, now walking beside her. The hospital is 10 minutes away. I've arranged transport. Sarah blinked. You called ahead? He nodded, not offering any further explanation. A black SUV stood waiting outside the station, its headlights cutting through the misty air. The driver stepped out and opened the back door. Without asking, the man gently helped Sarah and Ayaan into the back seat, then climbed in beside them. His quiet presence was strangely reassuring, like the warmth of a fire in winter. Within minutes, they reached the hospital. To her shock, it wasn't a government facility but a private children's hospital, one of the best in the province. Sarah instinctively hesitated. I can't afford this, she whispered, panic tightening her chest. You won't have to, he said calmly. Before she could argue, nurses rushed to take Ayan from her arms. A doctor greeted them by name, her son's name. We've been briefed, he said with a nod. Treatment is ready. His condition is serious, but we're confident we can stabilize him. Sarah followed behind in a daze as Ayan was wheeled through double doors. A nurse guided her to a small waiting room, where the man now stood watching her quietly. His eyes held something unspoken, as if waiting for her to ask what she hadn't dared ask before. Then came the nurse again, smiling kindly. Madam, your son is in good hands. And don't worry, Mr. Khalid's foundation is covering all costs, including medicine and aftercare. Sarah blinked. Mr. Khalid? The nurse nodded toward the man standing just behind her. That's Imran Khalid, founder of the Khalid Trust and one of the key donors of this hospital. Sarah turned slowly, eyes wide. You're him, she breathed. Imran nodded humbly. I don't usually introduce myself. I prefer to meet people as they are, without the titles getting in the way. You're the tech billionaire who, she trailed off, words failing her. She had read about him in newspapers, the man who dressed simply, traveled anonymously, and funded hospitals, schools, and shelters across Pakistan under his foundation. Why me? She whispered, voice cracking. Because you never stopped fighting for your son. Even when the world gave you nothing, he said gently. I look for strength, not in wealth or fame, but in hearts like yours. Sarah didn't cry from sadness anymore. She cried from something deeper. Hope. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood outside a clean, sunlit building with a plaque that read. Khalid Trust, Women's Development and Childcare Division. She wore a fresh cotton kurta, her hair neatly tied back, and her hands still slightly nervous as they gripped the strap of her small handbag. But behind her nervousness was something new, dignity. Beside her stood Ayan, healthy and smiling again, holding a small lunchbox with cartoon stickers on it. His cheeks had color, his eyes danced again, and the fever that once threatened his life was now just a memory. Sarah took a deep breath. When she had first stepped into the hospital weeks ago, she had no idea that her life was about to change, not just through medicine, but through mercy. True, quiet mercy, offered without conditions. After Ayan's treatment, she had been called into an office. Not for a bill, but an opportunity. The Khalid Trust offered her a stable job, an administrative assistant at a community training center, with free childcare services in the same building. Ayan would be nearby, learning and playing while Sarah worked with a salary that gave her more than just survival, it gave her stability. It gave her space to dream again. As she walked through the glass doors, the receptionist smiled warmly. Welcome back, Miss Sarah. She smiled shyly. It still feels strange, being called Miss Anything. You've earned it, the receptionist said. A familiar voice echoed from down the hallway. She's earned far more than that. Sarah turned and saw Imran Khalid walking toward her, no guards, no fanfare, just the same calm smile he wore that rainy day at the train station. Sir, she started, but he raised a hand gently. No titles. Just two people who met at the right time. I still don't understand why you chose me, she said, eyes brimming. I told you before, he said kindly, I travel to meet people who've already done the hard work, who've kept going despite being unseen. I don't give handouts, Sarah. I recognize courage. She blinked away the tears and nodded. I want to do more, she said suddenly. Maybe one day I can help other women like me. Single mothers. Widows. Girls who were told their voices don't matter. Imran's smile deepened. That's the spirit I saw that day. You're not just a mother, you're a spark. Ayan tugged her hand. Mama, can we go now? Sarah knelt beside him and kissed his forehead. Yes, baby. Today is our first step. She took one last look outside, where just weeks ago, she had stood with nothing but 600 rupees and a desperate heart. Then she looked forward, into a future she had never dared to imagine. Sometimes, the quietest whispers, "I'm sorry I can't pay," can become the most powerful turning point in someone's story. And this time, the story wasn't ending. It was only just beginning.